Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge in ecology, a major global threat, really. We're diving into why non-native fish are, well, so successful in freshwater systems. Invasion biology. Why do some just take over?
Yeah, it's a critical question. And we've got a great source to guide us today. It's a research paper led by Meng Xu called Ecological Similarity Governs Non-Native Fish Establishment While Human Pressure and Native Diversity Shape Invasion Richness. It's a really insightful study because it breaks down this idea of invasion success into different pieces.
Which is so important, right? Because success isn't just one thing. The paper looks at two distinct aspects, and this is key for you, the listener, to get up front. First, there's occurrence probability. Basically, what's the chance any single invader can even get a foothold, establish itself?
And second, there's invasion richness. So not just if one gets in, but how many different kinds of invaders manage to pile up in one place over time. And thinking about it from, say, a management perspective, those are really different problems. What lets the first fish in versus what lets the 20th fish establish, totally different challenges.
Exactly. It's like, is the door unlocked? That's one question. But how many different people eventually walk through that unlocked door? That's another. And knowing the difference helps figure out what to actually do about it.
Right. And before we get to their findings, we should probably set the stage. The authors were stepping into, well, a bit of an ecological debate zone. There are these two big, long-standing puzzles in invasion science that seem to contradict each other.
Okay, let's unpack those. The first one goes way back to Darwin, actually. It's called Darwin's naturalization conundrum. He basically had two opposing ideas about how similarity plays out. First, the pre-adaptation hypothesis. This suggests invaders that are, like, ecologically similar to the locals. They do well because they're already suited to the environment.
Makes sense. They're pre-adapted. But then Darwin also proposed the naturalization hypothesis. This says, no, wait, maybe it's the dissimilar invaders, the really different ones, that succeed because they aren't competing directly with the natives. Less competition, fewer shared enemies.
It's like opening a restaurant, right? Do you open another pizza place because people like pizza? That's pre-adaptation. Or do you open something totally unique like, I don't know, a gourmet insect bar? Because there's no competition. That's the naturalization idea.
Exactly. A good analogy. And the second puzzle, that's the invasion paradox, it asks. Does having lots of native species, high diversity, actually protect an ecosystem? Does it resist invasion? That's biotic resistance.
Or does high native diversity just signal that it's a really great place to live with lots of resources so everyone, natives and invaders alike, can thrive? That's biotic acceptance.
And historically, studies kept finding evidence pointing both ways. Kind of confusing.
So this paper tried to cut through that confusion.
Precisely. Buse and the team aimed to tackle both conundrums by looking really closely at similarity, both evolutionary and functional, and relating it to these different stages, establishment versus accumulation.
And the scale they worked at is, it's pretty mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking nearly 3,000 watersheds across North America, data on 921 fish species, including 62 exotic species and 272 translocated ones. This wasn't just a local pond study.
Continental scale. Wow. And you mentioned exotic versus translocated. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, it's an important distinction they made. Exotic species are the ones brought in from a completely different continent. Think like Asian carp in the Mississippi. Translocated species, on the other hand, are North American natives, but they've been moved outside their natural home range into a different watershed within the continent, like moving base from one river system to another where they didn't originally live.
Got it. And to figure all this out, they measured a ton of variables, didn't they?
They did. For ecological similarity, they looked at it two ways. Phylogenetic distance, basically. How closely related are the species on the evolutionary tree? And also functional distance. This used 18 different traits, things like body shape, what they eat, how fast they grow, how they reproduce. It's trying to capture, how these fish make a living, functionally speaking.
So not just who their cousins are, but what their job is in the ecosystem.
Exactly. And then they measured native diversity not just by counting species, but using things like phylogenetic diversity, how much evolutionary history is represented, and functional richness, how many different ecological roles the natives fill.
Okay, getting complex. What about outside factors?
Crucially, they included human pressure. They used something called the Human Modification Index, the HM Index. It bundles together things like agriculture, roads, dams, urban areas. Basically a measure of how much humans have messed with the place.
Right, the human footprint. And things like latitude and watershed size too, I assume?
Yep, those geographic factors were in the mix as well.
Okay, so massive data set, sophisticated variables. What did they actually find? Let's start with that first step, getting established. What predicts occurrence probability?
The results here were really striking. The dominant factor, by far, was ecological similarity. Non-native fish were significantly more likely to establish if they were more similar, both phylogenetically and functionally, to the native species already there.
So Darwin's pre-adaptation hypothesis gets a big tick. Being similar helps you get your foot in the door because you're already suited for that environment.
Exactly. It was the most important predictor. Depending on the specifics, similarity explained somewhere between roughly 24% and 46% of the variance in whether a species established or not. That's a huge chunk.
Wow. And this held true for both the exotics from other continents and the translocated natives.
Yep, consistent across both types. Similarity rules for initial establishment.
Were there other factors? You mentioned native diversity and human pressure earlier.
There were, but they were secondary compared to similarity. Higher latitude actually made establishment less likely. But higher native richness and more human pressure did slightly increase the odds of establishment.
Ah, so that hints at biotic acceptance, maybe. Good environments help everyone.
Kind of, yeah. It suggests favorable or disturbed conditions might help a bit with getting established. But the overwhelming message for that first step was you need to be ecologically similar. You need the right toolkit for the job, essentially.
Okay, so similarity is key to get in. But what about the next stage? What determines how many different invaders actually pile up? The invasion richness.
This is where the story takes a really interesting turn. The main driver completely shifts.
How so?
For invasion richness, the number one predictor became human pressure, that human modification index.
Really? So the more humans mess with an ecosystem.
The more different kinds of non-native species tend to successfully accumulate there. Human disturbance seems to open the floodgates, allowing multiple invaders to thrive long-term. It accounted for about 20% to 32% of the variance explained for richness.
Sobering. And what happened to native diversity in this stage? Did it still help invaders?
No, here it flipped completely. Higher native diversity significantly reduced the total number of established invaders. It constrained richness.
Ah, so this is where biotic resistance comes in. The native community fights back, but only when we look at the total number accumulating.
Precisely. But there's another crucial layer here. This resistance effect, this constraining effect of native diversity, it was really only clear for the translocated species.
The ones moved within North America. Why just them?
Well, the thinking goes like this. The exotic species, the ones from far away, might be so different ecologically, like your insect taco shop, that they find empty niches. They aren't directly competing as much with the natives, so native diversity doesn't stop them accumulating. But the translocated species, they're often closer relatives, ecologically more similar to the natives in the new watershed, like that competing pizza place. They're likely vying for the same resources, same habitats.
So a diverse native community, with lots of players already using those resources, can put up a much stronger fight against these more similar translocated invaders, limiting how many can ultimately squeeze in.
That seems to be the mechanism, yes. It highlights how the effect of native diversity changes depending on what you measure establishment or richness and who the invader is, exotic or translocated.
So this really gets at the core novelty of the paper, doesn't it? Reconciling these old paradoxes by looking at the invasion process in stages.
Absolutely. Let's try and synthesize that. How does it solve Darwin's conundrum? Well, for stage one, establishment, similarity is king. That supports pre-adaptation. You need to fit the environment. But for stage two, accumulation, that same similarity means more competition with natives, especially for translocated species. This limits richness, which aligns more with the outcome predicted by the naturalization hypothesis, that differences ultimately allow coexistence, even if similarity was needed to get started. The effect of similarity depends on the stage.
And the invasion paradox, how is that resolved?
Same idea. Native diversity seems to promote initial establishment slightly, hinting at biotic acceptance. High diversity means good conditions. But then that same native diversity acts as biotic resistance later on, limiting the final richness, especially for those closely competing translocated species.
So the takeaway message is kind of a two-part story.
Exactly. Environmental filters, mainly similarity, determine if an invader can get established initially. But it's human disturbance and the interactions within the community, the biotic resistance, that determine how many different invaders ultimately thrive there.
Okay, now, it's a huge study, but no study is perfect. Did the authors note any limitations?
They did, quite openly.
Okay.
A big one is that because they were using such large data sets covering vast areas, they focused mainly on presence absence, did the fish establish yes or no, and richness, how many species. They didn't have consistent data across all those sites for things like the abundance of the invaders or their biomass or their actual ecological impact. Those are really important parts of invasion success that aren't captured here. An invader could be established but exist in tiny numbers with little effect.
Right. Establishment doesn't automatically mean domination or damage. Yeah. What else?
They also mention the potential for introduction bias. Especially for fish, many non-natives are deliberately introduced, for fishing or aquaculture, that human assistance might inflate the success rates we see for establishment, making it look purely like environmental filtering when actually humans gave them a big helping hand to get started.
That makes sense. Hard to separate natural establishment from assisted establishment sometimes.
Definitely. So future work needs to dig into those stages more, maybe incorporating introduction pathways and looking at impact more directly. And they strongly advocate for applying this kind of integrated framework, looking at similarity, native diversity, and human pressure together to other groups like invasive plants or insects, and across all invasion stages.
Okay, so to really boil it down for you, the listener, think of invasion as a two-step hurdle. Step one, getting established, is mostly about fitting in, being ecologically similar to the locals, helps you survive initially. But step two, determining how many different invaders can pile up and potentially dominate. That seems to be driven heavily by us, by human disturbance, breaking down the ecosystem's natural defenses.
Which leads us to a pretty provocative final thought, really. Given that human pressure, that HM index, was the strongest predictor for invasion richness, what does that suggest about our conservation priorities? If highly disturbed environments are the ones accumulating the most invaders, maybe we should focus more effort on mitigating that disturbance, things like restoring habitats, improving water quality, reducing fragmentation. Could investing in strengthening the local ecosystem's resilience be more effective in the long run than trying to predict and screen every single potential invader based on similarity alone? This paper suggests that tackling our own footprint might be the most powerful lever we have against the rising tide of invasions. Something to think about.